in my opinion, when I look at some independent schools as an example, they're driven in a different way, because we need to be able to produce some of these children to go out on the other end, do great things in the world, so we can use them to market for a next batch of children. It's financial, isn't it? Let's not forget that it's still very much a business. Whereas I can see in some cases, some great state schools that I've been to that have got a natural hunger. The leadership's just got a hunger to do well for those students. Yeah. There's so much more for them when they look at some of their students, and you see the relationships they have with their students. And when you get talking to them, you know, they know so much about their students. They're just trying to do the best for the student.
Welcome to the Passion for Learning Inspiring Entrepreneurs Show, where we're committed to having engaging conversations with inspiring entrepreneurs who are embedding a passion for learning. We're here today with Wale Yusef, who's been featured on LBC and Sky News talking about the remarkable work that same academy have been doing in schools, increasing driver awareness training and road safety education. Wale is an incredible entrepreneur, and we have really interesting debates and discussions around public schools, grammar schools, independent schools, and social mobility. We're talking about how education affects our future and the remarkable work that teachers are doing to cause new possibilities in the lives of the next generation. Tune in, enjoy the show, and welcome Wale Yusef.
Preparing for his secondary school. He's 8, and then I've got a boy who's 15. Yeah. 15-year-old is doing GCSEs next year. 8-year-old is going to year 4. Malik, he is thinking about going to school. It's such a hard decision though, because with maturity comes education, and we just feel like we're more wiser to make a better decision for him in comparison to before, because he's a slightly different age when you had the other children.
Yeah. So what gives you that wisdom?
Time, exposure. We and my wife are just way too exposed to the school systems because of our organisations and our businesses. It's a bit too much, because it's different to, it's a bit like you, for example. I don't know which areas your organisation is, but we're present and been present in half of London boroughs, right? My organisation, at some point or another. To which point I'm just sponging. And then there's a primary school project. My wife is a speech and language therapist. Yeah. And her organisation has worked in a number of London boroughs as well, but strictly at primary level. Yeah. So there's this exposure to come to the end point. You know, and remember, mind you, some of the teachers and staff in these schools, you then become sort of friendly with them. Just through conversation. There's a lot of learning. Yep. And they're not junior members of staff. They're quite senior members of staff. It's really hard. And then you go national as well. So our organisation this academic year as far up as Wolverhampton, as far down as probably like Brighton. Wow. You know. It's a lot of travelling. A lot of seeing the width and breadth of the country. Yeah, so it's this exposure. Which is then, it's not helping the decision. If anything, it makes the decision more complex. See what I mean?
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so.
What makes a decision, what have you been exposed to that makes the decision more complex?
I would say probably the teachers, what they say, the environment. It makes things harder, because when you think about state schools, there was a stat that I saw about state schools, which is quite interesting. It said something along the lines of, could be wrong, you know, so you're twice as likely to receive an outstanding Ofsted rating in a more affluent area. See what I mean? And then, yesterday, I was in probably one of the most more affluent boroughs in London, Wandsworth. It looks like, I think it's about number 5 or 6 on the ratings. Went to a school there, and then just for conversation, you know, how you doing guys? Because I like to go and deliver some of our programs myself, and in particular this program is quite new, so I'm going out there, you know, how are you doing guys? You're okay? Yep. So hands up, you're going to secondary school? What secondary schools are we going to? Now mind you, you're talking to someone who's got a fairly good knowledge of secondary schools in and around the entire South London area. You know, and you know, I was speaking to them about some schools in Wandsworth, and one of them's like, yeah, well, they're going to a technology college down there called Ashcroft. I said, okay, that's great, fantastic. What about you? Where are you going to? Well, I'm going to an independent school in Lewisham. And I didn't make it a big deal of it, thought, oh, I'm aware of that school. And another one says, well, I'm going to an independent school in Kingston. And then I said, is anyone going to an not independent school, is anyone going to a school in Wandsworth? What about, for example, Emmanuel School? It's a really nice school as well in the area. And another one of the students turned around and said, one of our friends left and went there. Maybe just because of locality or whatever it is. And then I went home. I thought, children are very well spoken. We probably no EAL student, English as additional language. I don't know about, obviously, the SEN, special education needs and what have you. I go on Google, look at the school, outstanding Ofsted. But then what area am I in? House prices there are in the millions. You see what I mean? So how do you then break into that for the children to get that great education? We can't unless you live there. Because then the catchment areas for places like this, schools like this are so small. This is a one form entry in year 6 as well, by the way, one form entry. And we've got schools that we work with, 4 form entry year 6. Yep, 4. And I'm sure you might be exposed to more, that's even more.
Yeah.
How do you break into that?
So you're talking about social mobility, really, aren't you?
Of course. Of course. Where are you going? And then, so for parents, that becomes a really massive task. And the schools, I don't know, you can't really blame the schools. It's just the way it is.
It's a system,
It's
isn't
a
it?
system.
It's like strategy versus tactics, kind of.
Yeah, it's a system. Yeah, we're going to move to that area and then we're going to drive the prices of the houses in the area up, which happens in many cases. And then when we get there, in many cases, the parents are, in my opinion, are able to hold the school to account better. They are. Of course they are. Because, and on the flip side, before I go into that actually, but then on the flip side, what you've got is a school that if head teachers were to sit in front of me now, they'll probably say that they've got just as many challenges as other schools.
Yeah.
They're probably right in some cases. But there is a lot put onto other schools that schools in these certain catchment areas will never have to see. Let me tell you. EHCP, right?
EHCP, what's that?
Education Healthcare Plan.
Yeah.
So Education Healthcare Plan, especially when you've got children that have got autism, high function autism, behavioural issues, some schools don't really have to deal with that because of the social economic status of certain parents and the areas that students are coming from, poverty, housing, the type of housing that students, it's all just part of a system, right? So if you live here, you're going to have to go to this school. There might be some there might be some drug and alcohol fetal issues in some places. Let's be really honest, that's what happens. So those kids are sort of put into that sort of bracket in that sort of area. And then over here, you've got parents who probably could afford to take their children to independent school at prep and pre-prep or whatever it might be. And then they've got a school that's got an outstanding rating in that area, and parents are then, only specific parents are then trying to get into that school. But how can they do that if they can't afford the house prices in the area?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Then it becomes a challenge.
I'd love to know how many schools there are out there that are in deprived areas, primary schools, not secondary schools, that's a whole different conversation. They're in deprived areas, but then have an outstanding rating from Ofsted.
I know many.
Yeah? Now,
I don't know if that's a fair reflection, but I do know quite a
you
lot.
know a few. Yeah, and I probably, I can imagine you would, but you see what I mean?
That's because we work with them.
Yeah,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
But you see what I mean, though?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But
So what's the challenge for you now with your 8-year-old and where he's going to go to school?
so let's go back. If you think about my eldest child, at the point when he was going to secondary school, there was a huge drive for him to get into a grammar school. In my opinion, grammar schools are some of the best schools in the country, even better than some of the independent schools in my opinion, because it's raw academics. Now, I know some of the parents are having to tutor those children to be able to get into those schools. Yeah, fair enough. But some of the grammar schools I've been in, the standard is just on another level, in my opinion.
Wow. What makes the standard immaculate?
I still think it goes back to some of the same things that we talk about. I think it's, so what you've got is, in my opinion, right, so ambition is not marginalised in a grammar school. Now, that's not to say that it's marginalised in an independent school, but I feel like what you've got is these children who are absolutely driven to succeed. Some of them are talented and gifted, but if you've got into that school, they're absolutely driven to succeed. I met a child at the front row of a grammar school in Kingston. I said to him, "You going to university? You started applying?" He said, "Yeah, I've applied." "Where have you applied then?" "Oxbridge." I said, "Oh, is that right? Oxbridge? Anywhere else?" "No." Oxbridge. You see what I mean?
Decisive.
But the great thing about it, there were other children sitting next to him. He wasn't shy. He wasn't shy at all. He spoke up. "Yeah, Oxbridge. This is what we're doing." Could you imagine if children were around that sort of ambition, drive, that sort of, you know, it would be great for them. We're going to Oxbridge. So that's what you get in grammar schools.
So it's like that environment dictating the performance. So when you're around that sort of psychology, that sort of drive, determination,
it's great.
It seeps into you.
It has to. Now, think about it. If you look at the 11 plus, let's argue, for argument's sake, say top marks is 100 and, I don't know, lowest mark to get into the school is 80, for example, right? Now, there'll be some students who got 98 or whatever it is, maybe even 100. And some students might have got 80 or 81 and just sort of managed to get their way in. They might have had a sibling in the school or whatever it might be. By the end of it, they're all going to be holding each other to account, which is great because they're going at year 7. In many cases, they leave at year 13. No, they have to leave at year 13. They're all going to be holding each other to account. It's a great environment for them. It's a great environment. They all are driven to succeed. And if not, there are other children who are on the waiting list who want their space, right? So they can't mess up. They can't, you know, and to be honest, I don't think a lot of those schools, whilst some of them, again, head teachers might argue with me and say, well, of course we manage behaviour. And I believe they do, but I do not think that they manage behaviour in exactly the same way that state schools have to manage behaviour. I think that if you are doing the 11 plus and you get into an environment like grammar school, your outlook on things is different. These are the same children who are going to have hormonal issues at year 8, year 9, but I watched a documentary about schools recently, and one of the children said on there, well, you're not meant to like school, are you? That's exactly what he said. You're not meant to like school, are you? You know?
That's a common philosophy.
You know? And in many cases, some working classes are not meant to like school because of the relationship they might have had with school once upon a time. Yeah, but that's a whole different discussion and conversation. And so when you think about it, we like school, we're here, we're doing great things, we're around other people who want to succeed, and we're going to push for greatness together.
Yeah.
Now, I might have just been academically sound, got in at year 7, and might have been a bit lazy, but there's going to be my friends, when I look to my left and right, who are not so lazy. Yeah. They all push, you know, that
holding you to account.
Holding you to account. It's great.
How do you cultivate that environment in a state school? Because there are some schools that have done it and are doing it really, really well. I'm interested in unpicking what those fine-tuned elements are and how you generate that aspiration.
I think a lot of it, now, people tend to pass the buck with many conversations, but I think a lot of it would be down to the parenting in the home. Let's give you an example. We go to parents' evening, right? We're sitting in front of Mr. Edwards, and Mr. Edwards is my science teacher. And he turns around and says, well, do you know what, Wale, Wale's parents, he's always messing up, he always misbehaves, he never does any of his homework on time, and, you know, we need to work together to help him. Parent might turn around and say, well, actually, he told me that you pick on him, for example. Now, it could be that Mr. Edwards might not have great things to say about me because I am the child that might not listen and what have you. But the problem is, how detrimental is that for a child to hear that his parent is on side with him when the teacher is trying to raise a concern with the parent to help push this child forward? Now, this might be a bit too deep, and then if you look at generationally, shall I say, my parent didn't have a good relationship with school. What's the point? You don't have to aspire in school. Look at me, I turned out all right. So you haven't got a chance in it, in some cases.
It's a really interesting shift. So how do you generate, how do you generate that with parents then, where they are cultivating that environment for their children? Because that's no easy task.
Yeah, but I think it's all got to be about the aspirations that parents have for their children. Because if a parent is extremely aspirational for their child, we're not saying that you could have had a great profession or anything like that, but you might have high aspirations for your child, and you wanted that child to break any generational curses that were ever in your family.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? So I think a lot of it will be down to the parents and the aspirations that the parents have for the children, because otherwise, then you are just going to be in a cycle. But then I suppose, how is a teacher supposed to manage the aspirations a parent has for a child? If I've said to you that, go back to my little example, Mr. Edwards goes to my mum and dad and says, Wale, he misbehaves and all those other things that I just mentioned before, but that's fine, we can turn it around. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to set him extra work after school, and he can come and meet me every other Tuesday, for example. For 15 minutes, we're going to go through this, we're going to go through this, and we're going to go through that. One parent A's response, that would be great. Thanks a lot, Mr. Edwards. He really does need support in science. We're going to do this together. Sure. Mr. Edwards is totally reassured. In comparison to parent B, might turn around and say, okay, but he's been at school all day, and I'll try and get it to do it when I can. I'll sit with him when I can, but I'm not promising. Is that okay? Mr. Edwards is still just going to say, yeah, that's fine. Why? He's got 29 other students to worry about as well in that form. If
not many more beyond.
Yeah, if not many more beyond throughout the whole school. Do you see what I mean? Work with me.
Yeah.
In some cases, you have to work with me.
One of the things that I think about sometimes is like, imagine if school was like the dream place to be. Like if everyone wanted to go to school and like couldn't wait to go to school, and it was this phenomenal, vibrant learning environment. And I see it now in some schools, and I see examples of it is where they're cultivating this environment of excitement, this environment of curiosity, this environment of, that seems interesting, that seems like fun, I
really do take my hat off to those schools that are able to do that with the other challenges that come with those students walking through their door at 9 a.m. in the morning, because it is multifaceted. If you look at, I can't remember what the topic was, but something else, we need to do more education in schools. Let's put more on these teachers. We need to do more education in schools. Any sort of social issues there are, a lot of the time, because of critical mass, we need to do more education in schools. Do you know what I mean? But the teachers they do an amazing job. I think it wasn't until I started the organisation that I founded all those years ago, and I really started getting close to some of the teachers just over the years from working with them, and they move around, to different places throughout the world and throughout the UK. And you realise they do a great job. So if they're able to cultivate that environment in challenging circumstances, hats off to them. 100%. Because with all due respect to any teacher that sees it, that works in an independent school, many of the independent schools and sometimes grammar schools don't see half of what the teachers in some state schools see in terms of how they're having to manage the student and everything else that might come with the student.
Sure. Yeah.
And so all you're doing is driving standards. And we can go to the best state schools, we'll have you, thank you very much teacher, you're one of the best teachers in that state school, we'll have you and we'll have you. I don't know if they give them more money, but that's neither here nor there. Come and work with our very brilliant, excellent students. Drive standards, drive standards. Do you know why? Because we've got a parent over that shoulder who is paying to have my child or their child reach new heights.
Yeah. I'm really pleased that there's a lot of schools now doing really amazing things, like state schools, in terms of, like, I went to a production yesterday with year 6, the end of year production and whatnot, and the children were just like so on pulse. They were energetic. They did a lot of singing and dancing and acting around The Greatest Showman and many other things. And the head teacher said to me, she's a new head teacher there, and she said, they've never done this before. Okay. And I was like, wow. And they had 4 weeks of practice, this play, which lasted like an hour and a half, and I was just like, that's a lot of stuff. But it's that level of leadership and foresight that it takes for somebody to step outside the boundary. One of the things that she said to me as well was, I didn't converse with her about it because we was about to start the performance, but she was like, yeah, they started on Sats Week.
Oh, right,
But it's like no messed about. This is as important.
Yeah.
You know, and it's looking at it from a broad perspective, as opposed. I'm not saying whatever about that, but I'm saying like looking at it from a broad perspective as opposed to a narrow, I just need to get them through SATs. Because if you do that, then you're confining education to a linear pathway, which means then you're confining adults to a linear pathway, which means that you'll then not open up the receptors in the brain to actually be able to adapt and apply new skills in different environments.
That's interesting.
And then I think about, like, what's education for? Is it to get to the outstanding grade for the school, or is it for the child and the children to be fulfilled and to take their learning to the next level outside of that school?
I think everybody's got different motivations. I think there's a few that might have different motivations, and it really will depend on the leadership. In my opinion, when I look at some independent schools as an example, they're driven in a different way, because we need to be able to produce some of these children to go out on the other end, do great things in the world, so we can use them to market for a next batch of children. It's financial, isn't it? Let's not forget that it's still very much a business. Whereas I can see in some cases, there's some great state schools that I've been to that have got a natural hunger. The leadership's just got a hunger to do well for those students. There's so much more for them when they look at some of their students, and you see the relationships they have with their students. And when you get talking to them, you know, they know so much about their students. They're just trying to do the best for the student. Some would say that even in some independent schools, they're still doing the best for the student. No one would ever argue with that. I just feel like in some cases, there's just other motivations that might come into it as well, because of the financial element that is there.
One of the questions that I posed on social media the other day was, and I want to ask you the same question, was if a school managed to get a high percentage, say 80% of their children with A's or the equivalent at GCSE or whatever level they're at, and they track the students' progress over a 10-15 year progress period, and 90% of those students after the 10 years, so when they're 25, whatever, like after the 10-15 year period, are not happy, unfulfilled in jobs that they're not passionate or enjoy, just not leading a life that they would have desired to lead. To put it in simple context, they're all working in, majority of them are working in retail jobs that they don't want to be in long term. Versus, is that, and the question was, is that school a successful school? And I don't know the answer to that.
Neither do I, but I suppose at the time they would be measured, they will see themselves as a successful school. But then as soon as they step out of the gate, because now obviously it's mandatory for them to go to school until year 13. So as soon as they step out in year 13, there are so many different factors that determine that child's outcome. Environment, what your parents feed into you, what your friends might feed into you, your exposure, which sort of goes into environment when you think about it. It could be based on where you're living versus what you're exposed to in the outer world. Your networks, you know. There are people
I'm interested in that though, because that's interesting, because you spoke about exposure, you spoke about environment, you spoke about network. And going back to that play and that performance that I saw, that is instilling an understanding and a skill set and a subconscious skill set of working collaboratively, building networks, communicating effectively in order to get what you want. And the whole show was all about self-belief, essentially. And having that self-belief of going, this is what I want, and going back to what you said as well, this is what I want and I'm going to get it. So having that level of determination, resilience, and being able to apply what you've learned from school in a wider context. So if a school has given them that showmanship, that ability to connect with other human beings, isn't it the case then that they would be more fulfilled? And I'm talking about 90% here. I'm not talking about, because there's always going to be people that are, you know, dragged away by different environments and different circumstances, but if pretty much all of them are in that space, does the school have a responsibility there or not?
That's a good question. I think that the schools must have a responsibility there.
Well, is that question of whether is school in order to generate great exam results, or is it to cultivate great human beings that go out and do really positive things in the world?
I think it's got to be the latter. Because one of the great things that you realise, especially at primary school level, all levels of schooling, they talk about trying to find your passion, trying to find your passion, trying to find your passion. But then when you think about it, you can do that academically, but it could be that you saw something in that student when he or she was performing during a play, thought, wow, have you thought about going to do this? Have you thought about going to do that? Now, mind you, I've sat down and done maths, English, science for all these years, but in the end, I end up being a theatre director or something, a musical director, whatever it might be. Do you see what I mean? But if I wasn't given the opportunity to identify that passion, how would I have ever been the musical director?
Yeah, and this is where you speak to all the successful entrepreneurs and the people that are philanthropists and people that are doing great things in this world, and they say, well, I think back to that one occurrence, that one music teacher or that one drama teacher or that one teacher that instilled something in me that helped me. And usually it's creative.
Yeah.
And usually as well, which is I really want to do some stats and some analysis on this, but usually it's like the average student. It's usually like the C grade guy or the C grade girl that goes on to achieve phenomenal, and it's usually the A's and the A stars that tend to, I'm not going to say, it's usually the C's that tend to go on and just like thrive.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's too far off, because I feel like in many cases we're taught how to think and we're taught how to be, but there are many people who might not have done so well academically who've gone on to do great things creatively, right? There's a few people that come to mind, but my sister-in-law is probably a good example of that. I don't know academically if she was totally sound, but creatively she's brilliant. Like, she makes soap, she can do nails, she paints our house, she does loads of different things with her hands. And I definitely look at my sister as another example of that. Over the years, she didn't have the best relationship with school, even though many of the brothers and her siblings had quite reasonable relationships with school in terms of grades. And now she's founded an eyelash business, an eye care business, and she's doing really well for it. With it, she's passionate. She's got customers, a lot of customers. You see what I mean? So, but then I feel like it must have been too late for her to be able to identify her passion. So the teacher, all those years ago, if we were able to identify their passion then, and just really push with that, it doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to be linear.
And that's 100% it. It's not that, it's academic and it's art, and it's bridging the gap between the two, because both are phenomenal. It's just that both are needed, and that breadth of understanding, because some are going to go on to be academic scholars, some are going to go on to be really creative and artistic, and many now are going to actually find the gap in the middle.
Yeah,
and to run a business, you need the same. You need the academic intelligence to a degree, and you need the creative intelligence to actually go and create something and generate something new, fresh. It needs to be, innovative and that sort of thing. But you've also got to look at your books and your management, and you've got to be quite analytical as well.
Yeah, it's definitely like a fusion of both worlds. Especially when you think about, some professions, there's still a lot of academia that you might need to, especially to reach certain heights in some professions. There's still a level of academia you're going to need 100%. To be able to fulfill that role. 100%. In some cases, you might not need that. For example, sports is quite a good example. Footballers, right? Now, do they need to? There is a. In many cases, they're gifted and talented. Not all the time. Some of them, sometimes hard work beats talent, but some of them are gifted and talented. So if that's the case, when they get to the pro level, there's still a lot around decision making, teamwork. Like decision making is a really good one actually, because when you think about it, if you're on a football pitch and you receive the ball, you've got a split second to make a good decision.
100%.
Do you see what I mean? When they're analysing it, especially at the top level, they're not going to be talking about it as if they're in primary school or on a Sunday school pitch. It's going to be very, very detailed, very, very analytical. So it's all about having the football brain as well as the skill
The footwork,
to go with it.
That's one of the things that I used to hear a lot when I used to play football with. He's got a great football brain, and I love that. And I wish that football coaches and other sports coaches, especially at the younger years, especially when they're training and coaching younger children, relate football to the wider context of life.
Yeah.
And really link it in, because again, it can be quite similar in terms of its linear approach, and then looking at going, okay, so is this 9-year-old going to make it or not as a professional footballer? Actually, that's only part of the pathway that you should be looking at. Are they going to make it as an intelligent and well-rounded human being in the world? Because that decision-making, that skill of decision-making that you make on the football pitch, you might not make it as a pro footballer, or you might not make it to the Premiership or whatever, but that decision-making skill is still critical. It's critical in business, it's critical in an office, it's critical in any context of which you work. And just taking that moment to explain that and to make that a reality in the footballer's minds, or whatever sports athlete's minds, is powerful. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, of course. And I think many people don't really look at it like that. Yeah, they don't.
Oh, they're running around, they're playing football, they're doing music, they're doing something creative.
Whereas you don't think about how these sort of skills are transferable for just me being, as you said, the well-rounded individual, which is always going to be the end goal. No matter what field it is, it's still going to be the well-rounded individuals. Because, okay, you could use autism as a good example. So, for example, you find that in some cases, socially autistic people might struggle in some environments, right? But academically, in many cases, they're phenomenal, especially high-functioning autistic kids like those that might have Asperger's. They've got something that they're really, really interested in, and they double down on that, and they go on to do great things. So this is about trying to, and I know it might be slightly different with autistic kids for many other complications, but it's about having all of it, like, you know, the skill, as well as the social ability to be able to either communicate the skill, pass it on to others. Because the whole saying is master your art, your craft, and then give it away. Master your art and then give it away.
And the risk that schools face, and the risk that our society faces, and going back to that sort of example of having 90% with A's and A stars, what I was kind of getting at was that you don't want people to be insular, right? So you don't want people to be, you want people to be academic, and you want them to achieve, and you want them to get the A's and the A stars. Within that, you want them to be able to express themselves creatively. And there's so many examples and so many stories about how people get to a level of success, but they're not fulfilled. So it's about how do you bridge that gap? Why are they not fulfilled? Because a lot of it is insular behavior, and that's where you have well-being being challenged and all that sort of stuff. And it's really being able to be at the forefront of that adaptability, so that you can socialize, you are confident in social environments, rather than I'm just an academic, I can really good at this, but don't talk to me, I don't. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, someone else could say, well, this is the way the world works. There are going to be some people who can get their head down and write you a piece of software that opens that door for you without you doing something, or just looking at it, for example. And there will be some people that will be able to stand in front of 10 people and communicate what we're going to be doing for our next financial year in the business. Some would argue that not everybody's going to be good for everything. Some people are, and you see that a lot in teams.
I think you're 100% right. So let me just clarify that. I think you're 100% right, and I think that at the primary school level, that level of adaptability is really important, because you're then building the undercurrent for then the child to then progress in whichever way they want, in whichever way they choose. But if you don't give them the breadth, then you run that possibility of only having it one way.
Yeah, and that's also true as well, because essentially, as you said, and that's we've agreed, the end goal is to make them a well-rounded individual. And you want to give them the chance to be able to become that person in the future. So,
what are you gonna do? What is your decision-making process, and what is your next steps in terms of your housing situation and your boy? Like, are you gonna go grammar school? Are you gonna go state school? Have you decided?
well, ideally, I haven't discussed it too much as yet, but ideally for my 8-year-old, I'd love him to go to a grammar school. I'd absolutely love him to go to a grammar school, even more so than an independent school. More so than an independent school. One of the things that I feel is great with independent schools is the network, the networking ability. Yeah, I met this person at school now, look what they're doing, and look what they're, because in many cases it comes trickle down from the parents, the wealth that they've accumulated and the networks and things that they'll be doing, great. But apart from that, I love my boy to go to a grammar school.
Did your oldest boy go to a grammar school or a state school?
He got in, but he just didn't pass well enough, if that makes sense. And he had the tutoring as well. So he got into the school, but he didn't make, the top, whatever it was, a certain percent of. And let's be really honest, in some cases what you've got is parents that can afford independent schools, that will tutor their children to then go to a grammar school. So those who are coming from underprivileged backgrounds are doing exactly the same, but they're just more students for the schools to pick from. So if there's 1,000 people that are applying, only a fifth of those are going to get in. That's what it is.
Sure.
So it becomes quite hard. It's a bit of a challenge, but I'd love my boy to go to a grammar school. And then I'd probably suggest for him to go to an independent school second. And if there was a grammar school at primary level, which is a whole new discussion, but I'd have them go to grammar school first before.
If you had an excellent state school nearby, what would be your choice? Would it be the same choice, or would you?
At primary or secondary?
Secondary.
Oh, that's a tough decision because. So if we had an excellent state school, I think just because of our exposure now, we'd still want to give it a go because we'd be looking for specific things that other people might go straight over their head. How the students behave, how the students are, what the teachers like, how they communicate with you, the environment, the ethos. It's really powerful. Look at that school in Newham, I believe it was, where X amount of students applied for Oxbridge and got in, and obviously they were plastered all over the news a few months back. Newham, by the way, is one of the poorest, if not the most poorest borough in London. But those children, somehow, they have the aspirations. But the great thing about that is I was looking at some of those young people on the TV and they were talking with so much pride at the fact that they got into Oxford. And what are you going to study? Well, I'm going to study biomedical science. What are you going to study? I'm going to study business. And they've done it together. So do you see what I mean about that the aspirations really can be nurtured by your peer groups.
Sure. So
hats off to that head of sixth form, because it does not matter. And obviously the heads and the deputy heads at that school, I can't remember what, it's called Brampton Manor, something like that. Because they've cultivated that sort of environment in a place where some would say the odds are stacked against them.
Sure.
Let's be really honest.
How do you scale that sort of environment and make it widespread so that the majority of schools are doing that and not the minority?
That's a good question. Look at the LAE. Heard of the LAE? London Academy of Excellence. So there's 2 of them, and they have specific criteria to get in. Okay, so they say, I can't remember what the grades are. 5, the equivalents of A to C's, which I believe is a 6 to 8, or to be able to get in. And there's 1 in Tottenham, 1 in Stratford. They are supported by parents of independent schools. So they have partner independent schools that then provide them with teaching as well as other resources. And it seems like some of the students there are doing really well, but that's based on merit. You know what I mean? So they've all gone to state schools in and around the area, and then we've cherry picked some of them and put them into this sixth form environment.
Yeah. But how do you generate what a school like Brampton has done, for example, and have that same level of, I don't know what it is it leadership? Is it Is it other things, factors coming into play? How do you generate that level of possibility where students are achieving?
There's got to be a lot of work done with the students themselves. That's not down to the parents.
Yeah.
It can't be. Not because they're in a deprived area, because the parent, it's not enough with the parents. There's peer groups, there's the teachers. But I think in a school like that, I think there's a lot to be said for those teachers that are in that school.
Right.
In terms of how it might be the way that the sort of extracurricular life skills sessions they do with them. It could be the type of trips that they're taking them on. It could be their exposure, which would have been strategized.
Yeah.
Because it's not one or two, it was a group of them.
Yeah.
In a sixth form. And state school sixth form, 120 per year, maybe 240. There's a lot smaller than that. So a group of them, maybe 10% of them going to these schools and getting in. How many of them have applied? How many of them have applied? Mind you, we're talking about the students that got in. What about those who applied? There's something that those teachers have done very, very well. State school, one of the most poorest, one of the poorest boroughs in London, to be able to have all of those students go off to Oxbridge.
I would love to see that transferred and just cultivated across schools across the country.
It's not just academia. It can't be just academia. Because there's a lot of accountability that the students will have on themselves once they leave the classroom. Especially at that sort of age. You know, you're not talking about year 6 students, you're talking about year 13 students. When they finish, they've got to go home and do this. They're doing A-levels, 3-4 A-levels. They're juggling it. They might have a part-time job. They're still juggling all of that as well, you know. And they've come out and they've got those grades to be able to go to that university over there. It's not necessarily like an acceptance thing to be able to get into that university, but it's the fact of that university is quite hard for certain people to be able to get into from certain backgrounds. So there's something that they're doing there. I don't know. It must be a combination of things, because the environment argument is probably out of the window. The peer argument must be great in terms of how they're influencing each other. It's not the LAE model, because I'm assuming they've got years 7 to 11 in that school as well. It's not in the most affluent area. And actually, I even go as far as to say is Newham and a number of others, very few, one of the only boroughs in London that don't have any independent schools at secondary level.
Interesting.
You're going to struggle. If I think now about all of the boroughs that we are present and schools, there are very few that haven't got any independent schools. Maybe Barking and Dagenham? No. Newham? No. But in pretty much, especially on the south side of things, maybe Southwark. There's 33 London boroughs, by the way. And if you were to give me a borough, there's many independent schools in all of them. You see what I mean? You know?
It's interesting.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Hats off. Well, they're watching. Hats off to them.
What are you doing in your business now, and what's the next steps for your business?
So we deliver driving awareness, road safety education and driver training to new, young and the next generation of young drivers, motorists, pedestrians, passengers and pedestrians, shall I say. So at the moment, we are expanding what we're doing abroad. So we work in a number of regions, and we're expanding on that, do some exciting things next academic year. We're also expanding on our primary school projects that we do, which mainly take place in terms of delivery, April to July, just as it's about to go off to primary school, but they've got their decision of which school they're going to, because it helps the conversation that we have. And yeah, it's just really exciting. Growth.
Brilliant, love it. And how can people get in touch with you?
Me personally.
Or your company?
Company.
www. I don't just give you a personal
of course
phone.
not. 079 13. Yeah, same academy.
Yeah.
Website is easy, same.academy. Nice and easy.
Okay, awesome. Wale, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure having me.
Oh, pleasure.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Awesome.